Hello, and welcome to Sacred Science Sunday, where I, Holly Ulwitz, and leading health experts dive into the science behind spiritual and health practices. Sit back with an open mind as we prove or disprove the practices that light us up from the inside out. Keep your mind open and your heart shining. Can't wait to see you inside. Awesome. Well, okay, I guess just to start, we should probably explain what kombucha is, just for anybody that doesn't know, and maybe if you want to get into scobies and into that whole bit. I'm gonna let you lead as the expert. I'm a kombucha practitioner, but you definitely know a lot more than I do. So if you could give an overview.
Well, I'll be glad to. Yeah, so for folks who don't know me, my name is Matt Rymond. I've been a dietitian for about 11 or 12 years now, and I love kombucha. I was showing Holly, this isn't a home brew, but this is mine. And I drink it, I don't know, a few times a week. So kombucha is a really ancient drink. It's fermented tea, right? It's a probiotic fermented tea. And it's pretty cool. What they do is they get yeast and bacteria, and you brew tea, you add a sweetener of some kind, usually just sugar, and it produces a lot of different molecules, a lot of acids, some amino acids, and actually some B vitamins. And actually you brought up, I think you talked about recovery, and that's important because one of the steps is the production of ethanol. And so generally what happens is you have a SCOBY, which is a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, and the yeast eat the sugar, and they produce ethanol, right? And then the bacteria tend to eat the ethanol, and they also eat up the caffeine. So it's largely a decaffeinated product, which I think is great. And they produce a whole bunch of different molecules, just like we talked about. So we could actually get into that now a little bit if you want, because ethanol is one of the key components. And so when you go to a store, right, so you go to Whole Foods, you'll see a lot of different kombuchas. And your standard kombucha should have less than 0.5%. So it should be like a non-alcoholic beer. Which I think from a recovery perspective, I don't have that life experience, but I could see that being a bit of a judgment call, whether or not someone would want to include that. But you shouldn't expect your kombucha to be completely free of alcohol. You should expect there to be some amount of alcohol in it. One of the major brands, I'm not promoting this brand, it's just everywhere, is called GT's, and they have their standard, which is about 0.5 or less. They have their classic, which is 0.5 to 1% alcohol. Then they have their hard, which is 3%. And I've seen kombucha as high as 5 or 7% alcohol. So you're getting up into like a beer or a high alcoholic beer range. And usually when it's not just 0.5 or less, the bottle looks different. So it'll be like black and opaque. It'll say the alcohol content usually right there up front. And some of them will even have, I haven't seen this as much lately, but they used to have like a cellophane wrapper on the lid that says 21 plus all around, essentially indicating that it's not something that you should be consuming unless you're 21 and older and are okay with the alcohol content.
Well, that is really great contextual knowledge, just, at the store and in general, right? Because kombucha comes up in recovery as this thing that you could almost equate to mouthwash or certain over-the-counter medications that are these areas that can be a little bit triggering for people because there are trace amounts of alcohol. This was actually what led me to start making kombucha myself. As I learned more about the process, it was attractive to me, the idea that I could really have more control over how much alcohol and trace alcohol ended up in the kombucha at the end of it. So just learning more about it, the shorter fermentation period allows for less alcohol yield. And I don't personally do this, but I know that you can pasteurize kombucha as a second way to get that trace alcohol out. And then also, how much sugar you're putting into it. So for me, the intimate process of making it myself feels more safe than just going to the store, because I've bought kombucha for years and I've noticed seasonally it can vary, batch to batch sometimes, it can vary a little bit. I never really had any mind or mood altering effect from it, but just anything to more deeply immerse myself in a personal process with it, gave me a better relationship with it and confidence with it. I won't lie though, I was scared when I first started it and I had somebody else taste it, you know, like, did I do it wrong? Is there alcohol in it? So going into it knowing what you're doing is definitely important too.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it's a fairly complex process too, because you have like temperature, duration, type of bacteria, type of yeast. But if you're willing to do the research, yeah, you have more control. The stuff you buy in the store should be standard, but let's be real, they're not testing every batch every time, right? No one can do that. I think if I were concerned about recovery, I would be reluctant to try someone else's homebrew, just because, especially if they're not, if recovery isn't part of their life, because you can get wildly different, I shouldn't say wildly, you get significantly different amounts of alcohol. And let's be real, we all get busy, right? So we might plan to stop the fermentation on day 6, but might stop till day 7 or 8, and all that makes a difference.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, I actually have my my jar and like little setup. Right?
Yeah, let's see.
Put it in here. So they're like my bottles, my thing, and I don't have the lid. So there's like a lid that goes. It's underneath here right now, and so my my safe way to like know how long my batch is, I write it on my calendar. And then I also take like one of those dry erase markers and I write it on the metal lid of the kombucha and I slip it underneath the brewing jar. So that's like the way that I'm able to know, like, okay, like I can check the date on the calendar that's written underneath the jar and know how long the batch has been in for. And I never brew for longer than 10 days is kind of the way that I do it. But yeah, so that's the recovery part. I think it's always going to be a hot, controversial topic in recovery, but I'm willing to be a person to talk about it that's for it, because there are so many health benefits.
Yeah, there really are. Now, one of the things to bring up right up front is that all of the research is really in like test tubes in animals. There really isn't any research on the health impacts of humans, but we can look at the content of kombucha. We can kind of extrapolate what's going on, right? So there are a lot of different molecules. What gives it its vinegary taste is acetic acid. But one of the really cool acids is something called glucuronic acid. It's glucuric acid and glucuronic acid. And a major constituent of the bacteria are these glucuronic acid producing bacteria. And what's really cool is this particular acid is a component of making more than three, but 3 different molecules in the body, and they're all really important for joint health. So a lot of us have heard of glucosamine supplements for joints, chondroitin sulfate supplements for joints, and then hyaluronic acid is often used, I think, as a skin treatment. But hyaluronic acid actually is like one of the lubricating molecules in your joints. And it's sold as a supplement, which is a little precarious because the size of the molecule really makes a difference whether or not it's effective as a supplement. And it's also given as a medication, as an injection right into the joint, which is a little scary. But it's a component of all 3 of those molecules in your joints. And so, you know me, I'm a climber, you're very active. So there's reason to believe that consuming this on a regular basis could be helpful and maintaining what they call the matrix, or the connective tissue and the lubrication in your joints.
Which is awesome, right? And like I enjoy kombucha as well. So that's a plus too. It's really not a health food that like I feel I choke down.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had that experience as well. I know the vinegar taste can be a little offsetting, but there are some sweet versions too. I was reading too about there's like some heart benefits. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. So if you look at what they call like polyphenols and catechins, which are just plant molecules that are very good for us for a variety of reasons, there's a couple things. And I'll actually add, coming back to the alcohol content, very small amounts of alcohol sometimes can reduce your risk of heart disease and stroke. So for those of you who aren't worried about the alcohol content for recovery, it could be a benefit. But yeah, so when you look at like polyphenol and catechin content, that can reduce your heart disease risk. It can also really reduce your cancer risk. So those molecules actually stop the development of cancer cells, the growth of cancer, and the spread around the body. And actually, if you look at one of the main catechins in green tea, you've heard of like EGCG, there's EC, EGC, ECGC, they're all fairly similar, but the content of those can be about 115 to 150% of just a cup of green tea. So it's a really high amount in kombucha. I mean, the antioxidant level can be, I think, as high as like 98% higher than a cup of green tea. So when you're thinking about heart health and your overall body, it's really a concentrated source of nutrients.
So like, how does it, because this is a part where like I can read an article and like, you know, understand some of it, but you probably understand from much larger scope, you know, how that plays into the bacteria. You know, are these like specific molecule interactions as a result like of the symbiotic organism and the specific you know, cultures that are created? This thing, if you haven't seen it, looks like a hockey puck of like,
oh yeah,
I don't even know how you would describe it. I have one in my fridge, actually. If you want, I'll pull it
yeah,
out.
you want to show them? Yeah, that's cool. That's a great idea.
So this guy's like, when they're pausing, I put them in a jar. It's a little small for the size. You usually want your SCOBY to be like able to lay flat, but you can see it's like pretty thick.
Yeah.
I don't know how you would describe it. It's like a fleshy type membrane. Feels like a fur mushroom.
Yep. And I think it's often called like a mother or a mushroom, and it's a little weird for me to touch. I'll be honest. But yeah, it's slimy and it's rubbery. But yeah, so it's interesting. I think it was a Dr. Michael Greger, who's a big proponent of vegan diets. I want to find the author that described your gut bacteria as essentially a farm, right? And so the bacteria in your gut do all sorts of important things. So one kind of one-off example is when your blood clots, part of the way your blood clots is from vitamin K, and most of the vitamin K is made by the bacteria in your gut. So every time you stop bleeding, instead of not stopping bleeding, which is pretty scary, you can thank the bacteria in your gut. And so you can think of the bacteria in your gut almost like your own personal farm, and farm animals, you want to feed them and take care of them. And so the bacteria in your ferments are pretty similar in the sense that they produce a lot of the nutrients for you. One of the interesting ones, and I think there needs to be more research on this before we use kombucha as a B12 supplement for vegans, is one of the articles cited an extremely high amount of B12 in kombucha. So if you figure the recommended amount is 2.5 micrograms per day, and I believe 1 milligram is like 100 or 1,000 micrograms. I think it's 1,000 micrograms. The citation was 84 milligrams per liter. Now, most people aren't drinking a liter, but it means you're getting many times over the amount you would need for weeks or months in say, a cup of kombucha a day. Now, some of the questions were essentially like, what is the form of B12? There's multiple forms, and how readily available is it to your body? So we need to do some more reading in that, but it'd be pretty neat to have kombucha be a vegan source of B12. And all of that being produced by the farm of bacteria in your jar there. It's like you've got your own personal farm there.
And for anybody that's local, the mother has children. Every brew, it will shed a layer. So if you get inspired and you want to do this yourself, I've got harvest of mine, probably twice a month. So you're welcome to come grab a layer. I've given them away on Facebook Marketplace and that. And it's interesting, that we can like share health in that way. Yeah. Like children of microorganisms. I guess really interesting, Matt, like you mentioned that this is sometimes referred to as a mushroom, and there's so much like talk, at least I'm familiar with like Dr. Weil's work, right, where a lot of the superfoods and research focus that he has is mushrooms as superfoods. I have this mushroom face cream that I use, and it's got a couple products like that. So just from like your perspective in nutrition, what makes mushrooms so important to our health, and why are they powerful?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the honest answer is that's one I haven't put a lot of time of research into. I don't feel prepared to speak on it. I'm not sure if that's true or if it's hype. Because one of the things that makes things marketable is if people feel like they've got the edge on something new or that other people aren't up on, people get excited about that. That's not a judgment. I get excited about that too, right? So I don't know. That would be a great topic. I'd love to dig into that maybe in a week or two, and we can really get into that if you want.
I appreciate your honesty too. You know, and just like there's a lot of information out there. But yeah, it's something I'm like curious about, and I feel like it's totally possible, you know, that it could be hype, and nutrition, especially, you know, can be that way.
Yeah, it really can, and it's really unfortunate. I'll toss up one random piece of information about mushrooms too. So I was looking into like which mushrooms are most nutritious, and there is this tendency, and I do it too, right? If something's more expensive, or it's touted as being healthier, there's a bias towards believing that because we want to eat the most nutritious thing. So I started looking at nutritional content of like, you know, those hardy portobello mushrooms that are often a texture replacement for meat. Now, they're not at all a protein replacement for meat. Mushrooms have essentially no protein in them, very small amount, but they have the texture and they're delicious. And I was comparing them to those small, like white button mushrooms, the cheapest mushrooms you can get at any store anywhere. And actually they were mostly nutritionally the same, except the cheaper white button mushrooms had more potassium, which is a mineral people get far too little of, and they had more selenium, a significant amount more selenium, which is also an antioxidant people rarely get enough of. So it's kind of a neat example of buying the more affordable everyday item actually being better for you.
Well, that's pretty interesting. You know, and having like a business background as well, like, you know, I remember learning this in business school, right? Like that it's this psychological strategy of how do we create like a context of value. And sometimes that is just, you know, through how much something costs. And I'm sure we could do a whole episode too on labels, you know, and what's legal for labeling and what isn't. I could definitely speak a lot on that. So it's just so potent, you know, to have this background and to have your insight on it. Gosh, I think I had one other question I was going to ask you, and it's totally like elapsed my brain.
That's okay.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll give you a chance. Like, was there any other topics before we start to wrap here? I want to give people an opportunity to like ask questions in the comments, and even if we don't get to them live right now, we can always answer them later.
Yeah.
But did you have anything else that stood out to you?
Yeah, so just from like a safety perspective, like occasionally you hear about like toxic effects, and from all the things I've read, that seems to be kind of one-off situations. So it could be there's a case of toxicity, but they were brewing their kombucha in a vase, and the enamel from the vase was being dissolved by the acid, so they're essentially eating enamel. Others were basically it got contaminated, so you do have to be quite careful about contamination. They got some pretty nasty bugs from contamination. Normally the acidity and the alcohol, but mostly the acidity really prevents that, but it's not a perfect process, so it's good to learn about that. And then there are cases with people who have like kidney issues or HIV that make them more prone to acidosis. And so that's something where if you have any particular health condition, you know, as much as it gets said all the time, you should talk to a professional that's knowledgeable about nutrition. In those cases, it really is a specialty treatment want to do that. Other concerns are with like pregnant women, because it can promote it's a component, the glucuronic acid is also a component of heparin, which is a blood thinner your body makes. I don't foresee that being a problem, but it's a caution. The other caution, I hate saying this because I love kombucha, so I'll say that every good thing you eat has something bad about it. If you avoided all the negatives, you wouldn't eat or drink anything ever again. But there's a concern with trace amounts of lead in some kombucha, and there's lead and heavy metals and all sorts of things in everything. In fact, there's another molecule in kombucha that can be chelating and help remove heavy metals. But for that reason, they don't recommend it on a regular basis for kids. That lead content could relate to the tea leaves. There's an issue with drinking lots and lots of green tea in particular, and lead toxicity. Maybe not toxicity, consuming lead. And it could be the container. So we need to learn more. But all that to say, I think if you're drinking a half cup a day, all the research says it's great for you. I drink more than that on a regular basis, and I don't think it's a concern. So I want to put that out there, but I think it's a great drink.
Awesome. And I absolutely feel the same way. And there's always that double-edged sword. Not every thing is going to be great for everyone, and I think that on this bigger journey that we're on to get in touch with our bodies and our health, primarily it's about figuring out what things work for you and what don't. So kombucha may be great for the majority of people, but I know I've got a girlfriend that struggles with like pH level and is very sensitive hormonally, so kombucha, the acidity level is not great for her. And that can be true. We can all have different sensitivities that may exclude it, so not a one fits all solution. Okay, to think of my question, and it was about like research. So can you really think of like just kind of imagining here, like why no human trials on kombucha? Is it just that it's not pressing science right now? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it's not pressing science. You could argue it's not profitable. I think that especially if you're okay with some variance in the alcohol content and things like that, kombucha can be, cheap kombucha can be $2 a bottle, and that tends to be higher in sugar. Read the sugar content of your kombucha, it can vary broadly. Kombucha can either be $4 a bottle, right? So if you drink a $2.50 bottle every day, you're talking, I think, $1,100 a year. If you spend $20 a year, you can brew gallons of it.
It's true.
You know what I mean, right? Even if you do the more expensive June, have you had June before?
No, but I've heard about June. So June eats honey, correct?
Yeah, and so June is delicious. Obviously, it's a lot more expensive to make, but it's delicious. And what's cool, they've done this with like rooibos tea. People have done it with coffee. So it's really interesting. I really hope they do more research. But to answer your question, I think a lot of it's just profitability, and it's not really like it's not a disease state for which you can develop a treatment for.
Yeah, the whole alternative and complementary medicine, it's tough, right? But I do think we're making strides, and we're seeing more research just kind of on the holistic horizon in general. So I'm optimistic that it's something we could see in our lifetime, and I'll definitely always be a cheerleader for it. But yeah, okay, so as we're getting close to wrapping here, I want to remind you guys, if you're not on the YouTube channel, to check that out. You can catch a really neat collection of replays. There's a whole Sacred Science playlist to check out. So if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, check that out. And again, if you have any questions that come up when you're rewatching later, please feel free to drop comments. We'd be happy to answer those questions, and we enjoy these conversations. But yeah, other than that, Matt, do you have anything to close with? I wanted to thank you for coming on again to speak about this. I know only a little, and it's always so valuable. I get so much out of, your breadth of knowledge. So thank you for being here.
No, this is great, Holly. You're wonderful, and I love Divine Unity Wellness. So it's great to be a part of your Sacred Science Sundays. No, I don't have anything else I want to wrap up with. I think I got out what I felt was good to share. And yeah, if there's any questions, I'd love to take those too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Matt. And thank you everybody that came on today to watch. We really appreciate you guys being part of the community. Please feel free to share within this Facebook group, on YouTube, be a part of, be immersed in. This is a space created not just for us to speak, but for your healing. So if you have questions, if you have requests for future videos, we'd love to hear your insight and your experiences of health and healing. So that's all for us today. Thank you so much, and huzzah again for the dual Facebook Live. I'm so proud of us. Yes.
We'd love to do it again whenever you would like. And everyone, thank you so much for watching. Matt Rymond here. Always glad to be here with Holly Ulowitz on Divine Unity Wellness. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Well, have an awesome rest of the day today.